The Florida Atlantic Voice rolls on, presented by Robes Law Group, ROBES, robeslawgroup.com. Always in the community for you, whether it is a slip and fall or an automobile accident or a motorcycle accident or anything that may require a personal injury lawyer. May I direct you to Robes Law Group, ROBES, robeslawgroup.com. In a crowded market in South Florida, Robes Law Group stands alone. ROBES, robeslawgroup.com. We can do nothing without them here on the Florida Atlantic Voice, and we appreciate them, and I hope that in the unexpected instance, because it's always unexpected, that you need a personal injury lawyer, you go ahead and reach out to Robes Law Group, ROBES, robeslawgroup.com. They will get you taken care of, and they will help you with what is sometimes one of the more arduous experiences of your life. Robes Law Group, ROBES, robeslawgroup.com. I want to give a bit of a forewarning before we progress on here through a really interesting, unique edition of the Florida Atlantic Voice. I have been battling what some call a sinus infection for like the last week, and it is super annoying. I am very much on the back end of it. However, there are still some times of disgusting flare-ups of phlegm. That was good alliteration on my part. So if that happens, I will attempt to shield you from it. Not the literal phlegm, but the sound of said phlegm. And if that does take place, well, I apologize. And you know what? I'll try and take care of it in post-production, so you don't have to deal with it. But if I'm feeling lazy, I'm not going to. So we'll just, I just wanted to give you a forewarning as your friendly Florida Atlantic play-by-play voice and your favorite damn podcaster, that might be in the offering for you. So with the NFL draft this past weekend, I was thinking, how can I tie in the draft to FAU? And of course, we already did it last week, going through the 10 FAU football players all time that have been selected in the NFL draft. But then I got to thinking, isn't the NFL draft almost completely contingent upon what if? And I know that there are, in each draft, some sure things, some guys that you know are going to pan out, some guys that you know are going to sign their contracts, they're going to get into rookie minicamp, they're going to go through training camp, and sure enough, you're going to see them starting week number 1, beginning of September, and they're going to end up being 10, 11-year Hall of Famers. There are sure things, but more often than not, because sure things are the exception and not the rule, there are the what ifs. And that is why we actually take great interest in the NFL draft. It is why over 800,000 souls show up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in late April to listen to hundreds of names get called out. There's no action. There's no throwing of a football. There's no game planning. There's no X's and O's. You literally just watch grown men walk onto the stage and say names into a microphone. But the allure of that is, well, this team selected this guy, and what if he turns into something incredible? That's the essence. That's the core of the passion for the NFL draft. Now, could you catch me showing up to the NFL draft, traveling to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and much like on New Year's Eve when people show up to Times Square and it's such a crush of humanity that you don't dare go off to the bathroom, so you put on an adult diaper and just swallow your pride and well, do your business on yourself until you can go clean yourself up at 2 a.m. I imagine that's what it's like at the NFL draft. Will you ever catch me doing that? The answer to that is hell no. I mean, not a chance. But from the comfort of my home, I will watch it because I, too, am curious about the what-if aspect of the NFL draft. And so then I was like, what are some of the great what-ifs in FAU sports history? And I know you might be saying, Ken, what a stretch for a topic. What a stretch for a main idea of a Florida Atlantic Voice podcast. Well, my response to you would be, you didn't put two and two together. You didn't find the connection. And also, if you don't like it, you do your own damn Florida Atlantic podcast. Okay? So I wanted to go through some of the great what-ifs in FAU sports history. But I didn't want to selfishly just sit down and create my own what-ifs, and also I really didn't have the mental bandwidth nor the overt energetic desire to come up with like 10 of them. So because I appreciate you, the FAU sports fan, reached out to you for some of your great what-ifs. And you know what? Some of them were really good. A couple of them I've never even really considered, and I want to go through a vast number of them that you sent me to cover here on the Florida Atlantic Voice. So I'm going to start with one of my own just to set the tone here. Okay, this is really random, and I don't know why I thought of it. And it is not. I don't know of anybody listening to this right now, or anybody that sent in their great FAU sports what ifs that would have had any inkling of going this into the weeds with an FAU what if. And I'm not bragging about this, but this is how big a nerd I am. And these are the types of things I think about. And I actually think it's a type of psychosis, and I may need to go see someone for it and might need medication to help treat it. But I want to go back to the FAU basketball glory days. I want to go back to the 2020-2021 FAU basketball season. And I know what some of you are saying already. I don't remember a damn thing from the 2020-2021 FAU basketball season. And I get that. And I understand that. And honestly, there are very few that remember anything about the 2020-2021 FAU basketball season. But I want to go back there because that season and some of the departures that ended up taking place, or at least the scene being set for some of those departures, ended up bringing in the building blocks that became the FAU Final Four team and the heyday of FAU basketball. All right, so let's go back to 2020-2021, otherwise known as the season where some fans could show up on the benches. All of the seats were separated so teammates couldn't sit next to one another, and the broadcasters, a.k.a. me, had to be a full 18 feet away from the baseline and up on a riser and wearing a mask while they called the game. That got sweaty. If I was wearing my glasses, it got foggy. It altogether was a very uncomfortable experience. And to be quite honest, that entire basketball season didn't even feel like a college basketball season. And full circle, that was the year that John Jacobs, assistant head coach, and Baylor won the national championship in Indianapolis over Gonzaga. All right, but I digress. 2020-2021. Who is FAU starting five-man, starting center that year? Carlos Schillinch. Schillinch was a really good player. He is someone that had multiple injuries to both knees, and this was truly the first time, and I stole it from him, that I heard Dusty May describe a player as YMCA in it. YMCA ball. If you remember, during this past year's Final Four, when Yaxel Lendeborg was hurt and hobbled, after the Final Four win that sent Michigan in the national championship game, Dusty May dropped another, he was YMCA balling it, to describe Yaxel Lendeborg. But before Dusty brought that to Michigan, he was using that on a regular basis with FAU basketball. And I think that the first time that I actually heard him use this was when he first started at Florida Atlantic, and he brought in a number of play, or at least a specific player, I should say, that he had at Louisiana Tech. And I promise you, a lot of you guys have not heard of this name in a long time, thought of him, but he's a great guy. And he sort of was the face of the early buy-in of Dusty May, and that was Xavier Stapleton, who had true NBA talent, but went through a plethora of injuries at Louisiana Tech, so much so that when he transferred to FAU, he was balling like a 40-year-old that you're seeing at the YMCA who takes 9 years to stretch out, and he's wearing the sweatpants to keep himself warm. In fact, he's playing in those sweatpants, but as soon as he hits the floor, he's banging 30-foot threes in your eye, and he's boxing you out, and it hurts. That was Xavier Stapleton, YMCA balling it. And then Carlos Schillinch was the second recipient of the Dusty May YMCA balling it moniker. But Schillinch decided to leave FAU early with 1 year left of eligibility and decided to go play overseas. In fact, Carlos Schillinch, a former teammate in Europe of Mike Forrest, FAU basketball legend. So those two reunited once Mike Forrest graduated, and his year 2 in Europe, he was a teammate of Schillinch, who has gone on to have a really lucrative European career because he has an outstanding basketball ability that translated really well to Europe. So, again, if you're an FAU basketball junkie, you remember Carlos Schillinch and how good he was at FAU. But Schillinch leaving then opened the door to a guy you may remember named Vlad Golden. Seldom used, vagabond, big man, Texas Tech, who then signed with Florida Atlantic, started in real aggressive fashion, true fashion, his college basketball career. And Vlad Golden, hero of the Final Four team. Vlad Golden, best player back half of the following run at back year, and now member of the Miami Heat. Vlad Golden. So Carlos Schillinch graduating, that is what gave FAU the scholarship and the need to go get a player like Vlad Golden. That same 2020-2021 season, you may remember a promising young player, a three-man, big, bulky, long, fast, strong Keenan Blackshear. Blackshear, who was the first true impact high school entry in the Dusty May era. Keenan Blackshear was a stud. And he had not only upside, but I don't even think that began to describe how high or even non-existent his ceiling was. He came in and contributed right away as a freshman to Keenan Blackshear. Now, this was starting to get to the border of what we know now is the portal, and then potential of compensation for players to jump into the portal and go elsewhere. And that is what happened with Keenan Blackshear. After FAU was eliminated from the Conference USA tournament by Louisiana Tech in 2021, after winning their first game against UTEP, Keenan Blackshear was actually, to me, a pretty surprise entry into the transfer portal. He would go on to have a good career and multiple NCAA tournament appearances at Nevada, but no Keenan Blackshear meant that a young man who was looking for a home, who had played JUCO and was desperate to find some place to play out his college basketball days, a young man by the name of Brandon Weatherspoon was able to come in and take the scholarship that was left by Keenan Blackshear. And didn't that alter the trajectory of FAU basketball? Weatherspoon immediately came in, gave FAU an edge, gave them a veteran presence, a guy who could bang in the three, but also wasn't afraid, undersized, to go in and throw his weight around at the four, a true leader, and for me, one of the most underappreciated names ever in FAU basketball history, and I think the most underappreciated contributor who did it all, true Swiss Army knife with the FAU Final Four team. So Keenan Blackshear transferring to Nevada gave us Brandon Weatherspoon. Then there's Joe French, and I promise you very few of you remember the name, okay? So coming out of 2020, 2021, Joe French was acquired via transfer portal by Dusty May after a strong season at Bethune-Cookman. There was a lot of interest in Joe French. He was an impact wing. He could handle, he could shoot, he could finish at the rim, and Joe French committed to Florida Atlantic. But as he got into camp to start the 2021-2022 season, something just wasn't right, and something didn't click for him. And it seemed like there were some things outside of his control happening in his personal life that caused him to decide that this wasn't for him and that he was going to have to depart FAU. And so early on in fall camp, Joe French ended up leaving, and that is what necessitated the path to recruiting a young high schooler, a prolific scorer named Trey Carroll, who signed in November of 2022 and 2021. November of 2021 is when Trey Carroll signed with Florida Atlantic, and we know his story and what he became for FAU basketball. So let's recap these what-ifs here. Carlos Schilling left FAU to go play professional basketball. Vlad Golden took his place. Keenan Blackshear transferred to Nevada after the 2020-2021 season. That ushered in Brandon Weatherspoon. Joe French never really started his FAU career after transferring in from Bethune-Cookman. That gave the scholarship to true freshman Trey Carroll. And then fast forward a year, 2021-2022. At the end of the Conference USA tournament, when Florida Atlantic blew out by UAB, the eventual conference champions, went to the NCAA tournament, and put a pin in that one because that's part of the backstory, the lore of FAU's Final Four team is avenging the beating they took to UAB. But Everett Winchester decided after that game, I don't want to play college basketball anymore. That's sort of a wrap for me. I want to prepare for the next step in my basketball career. So much so he did not even go to Daytona for the CBI to play Northern Colorado just a couple of weeks later. But Everett Winchester not coming back for his final year. He had an extra year of eligibility because of COVID. Him not coming back for his final season, 2022-2023. Anybody want to guess who took that scholarship? I'll give you 3, 2, 1. Out of UConn, Jalen Gaffney. So there you go. That is my obscure, completely in the weeds, nerd boy what if to get us kicked off here with FAU basketball. 2020-2021, after that season, goodbye Carlos Schilling, goes to start his pro career. Hello, Vlad Golden. Goodbye, young wing Keenan Blackshear off to Nevada. Brandon Weatherspoon enters the mix. Joe French, Bethune-Cookman transfer, never started his FAU career. That is what opened the door because FAU needed a Trey Carroll, and Trey Carroll signs with FAU in November of 21. And then Everett Winchester opting not to come back for his final season of eligibility, 2022-2023. That gives the scholarship to UConn transfer Jalen Gaffney, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, one more obscure and I won't spend a lot of time on this. Brett Comer, you might remember the name if you're a college basketball head. He was the starting point guard, Florida Gulf Coast, the Dunk City 2013 sensation. FGCU going to the Sweet 16, a huge upset of Georgetown in round number 1, really put FGCU on the map. Who was Brett Comer originally committed to? That's right, Mike Jarvis and Florida Atlantic. Speaking of another Mike Jarvis blue chipper that came in and actually played a year at FAU, Stephen Moody, 15.6 points per game as a freshman, second team All-Sun Belt, then transferred to Ole Miss, led the SEC in scoring his senior year, 23.6 points per game. So those are big what-ifs as well. What if Brett Comer came to Florida Atlantic? Would they have been able to reclaim the glory of the 2010-2011 conference championship season? And Steph Moody, if he stayed at Florida Atlantic, what would he have become at FAU? So, man, all right, there we go. Those are some rando what-ifs to start us off, but you get the idea. That's what's fun about what-ifs, or hypothetical. Saying what-ifs is easier instead of hypothetical. That's 5 syllables. Nobody wants to hear that. That's pretentious, in fact, to include that in the title of this podcast, so that is why I didn't. All right, so let's go to some of your entries into the great FAU sports what-ifs, and let's start with Aiden. What if we get selected to a bowl game in 2012, 2013 and don't hire Charlie Partridge? Now, that's an interesting one for sure. I think this goes back to another hypothetical, another what if that I got pretty often, at least 4 or 5 times on social media when I pose the great FAU what if question. So let's extrapolate, but let's tie it into Aiden here. All right. So if FAU gets selected to a bowl game, 2012, 2013. In fact, I think we can separate these now that I think about it. And what Aiden is talking about is the Carl Pelini final season, or just over half a season. 2013, Florida Atlantic is 2-6 on the year, coming off a bye week, 2-5 on the year, I should say. Go to Auburn, lose that game, fall to 2-6 on the season. And that is then the fateful bye week where a Carl Pelini and a number of members of the FAU football coaching staff go to the Keys for some reason instead of going to talk to recruits and go into recruit high schools. But their decision. But that is the trip where there was alleged drug use. And it was reported to then AD Pat Chun, and immediately Carl Pelini fired on site. Defensive coordinator Pete Rextis fired on site. The entire program is thrown into disarray. FAU becomes a national college football laughingstock. So Florida Atlantic, coming out of that bye week, plays Tulane in front of a smattering of FAU fans with egg all over their faces. Brian Wright is the interim head coach who was the offensive coordinator. What does FAU do? Blows out Tulane and then proceeds to go on a month run of domination, including a Shula Bowl rout of FIU, including going to Southern Miss and absolutely pasting the Golden Eagles with one of the single greatest rushing performances as a team in the history of FAU football. Florida Atlantic got to 6-6, won their Final Four, won out under interim head coach Brian Wright, turned what was an epic nightmare into a feel-good story, yet Florida Atlantic did not earn a bowl invite. So that is what brings us to Aiden's tweet. What if FAU gets selected to a bowl game in 2012, 2013, and FAU doesn't hire Charlie Partridge? Here's what I'll say. I think that even if FAU is selected to play in a bowl game in 2013, Florida Atlantic still is hiring a new head coach. I don't think that Brian Wright, the great job he did and the calming presence he was, I don't think that there was much of a desire to bring him on as the full-time head coach. I think that there is still a vast alternate universe where Charlie Partridge still becomes FAU's head football coach, even if FAU goes to a bowl game, even if they get the nod after becoming bowl eligible. Don't forget, at the time, Charlie Partridge was one of the, like he is now in college football, one of the prize assistant coaches, one of the prize recruiters. He was very much next in line for the right college football head coaching job, especially in the Southeast, where he plied his trade as then the top recruiter at Wisconsin and then top recruiter at Arkansas. State of Florida, where he hails from, that was his bread and butter, and he absolutely dominated this area. He was a no-brainer head coaching hire. And I know that the record, not even close to what he thought it would be and what the promise dictated it should have been for FAU, but I still maintain Charlie Partridge ended up being one of the most important hires that we've seen at Florida Atlantic Athletics as a whole, because he came in and he immediately set structure and he immediately started to try and construct a culture after the disaster that was the crumbling of the FAU football program coming off of the one-win 2011 season, Carl Pelini's first year, where you saw maybe some incremental progress, into the complete implosion that Carl Pelini's actions then administered to the FAU football program. Charlie Partridge coming in, that at least set a base. Charlie Partridge did not have a good on-field tenure. Charlie Partridge, though, had an extremely important part to play in the upward ascent of Florida Atlantic football. So, again, Charlie Partridge, I think he still gets hired. I think he still gets hired even if FAU gets the benefit of the doubt and goes to a bowl game in 2013. Charlie Partridge, by the way, after a year with the Indianapolis Colts, now the defensive line coach at Notre Dame. So Coach Partridge, who is still held near and dear to many FAU football fans' hearts, doing okay for himself for sure. So then let me flip around here. I want to see if I actually put this in here. No, I did not. Okay. So I got a number of these, and I think that this is a good transition into this conversation. So you remember 2015, Charlie Partridge's second year. You're getting into the final couple of weeks of the season. In fact, the final 2 weeks of the season. And Florida Atlantic goes up to Gainesville to play Florida, the newly christened SEC East champions, after beating Georgia the week before. So Florida is trying to jockey for ranking position. I believe they were number 8 at the time going into the game. Florida Atlantic, meanwhile, it has only 2 wins on the season, okay? This is year 2, Charlie Partridge. This is 2015. Florida Atlantic proceeds to go into Gainesville, and you know the story if you're an FAU football fan, and for you newbies, you've probably heard about it, but you don't know just how heartbreaking this entire experience was. Florida Atlantic goes in on a Saturday afternoon against the SEC East champions, and they proceed to slap Florida around. Outclassed them, outplayed them, outphysicaled them, intimidated them. Trey Hendrickson had one of his finest games in an FAU football uniform, forcing a forced fumble that was recovered by O.C. Rose in the end zone that brought Florida Atlantic even with Florida in the fourth quarter. FAU had the ball with a chance to win in overtime against the Gators, and the most gruesome non-call in FAU football history took place in this overtime. Quez Johnson, on a third down, throws the ball into the right side of the end zone. Jensen Stoshak is being bear-hugged in the end zone, bear-hugged and ripped down a couple of seconds before the ball actually gets to him. It's clear as day. The most damning example of college football pass interference you're ever going to find. Pass interference at any level of the sport. And the official, the SEC official, gets intimidated by the crowd and keeps the flag in his pocket. FAU would then face fourth down, incomplete pass, and Florida hung on a 6-point win in overtime at the Swamp. It would have been one of the biggest upsets in college football in the modern era, and instead Florida Atlantic gets screwed by the officials because they didn't have the guts to throw a rightful flag as Jensen Stoshak is assaulted in the end zone. Okay? It still drives me crazy. It would have been an automatic first down. You remember Florida missed the extra point when they scored first in overtime. So all Florida Atlantic would have had to do, score a touchdown, Craig Joseph, extra point. We all go home celebrating, and we mock Florida Gators fans until the end of time. But it was not to be. Now, what if FAU and Charlie Partridge would have won that game? I don't know if we actually get Lane Kiffin if that happens. Because if FAU beats Florida, doesn't that buy Charlie Partridge, even if the 2016 season goes downhill like it did, 3 wins in that final year? If FAU beats Florida on the road and then, like they did the week after, goes and takes down Old Dominion to end that season on a high note, doesn't that potentially earn Charlie Partridge benefit of the doubt to at least start the 2017 season? So while it is still caused in the recesses of our minds some sleepless nights thinking about what could have been, what if in Gainesville, I'm not particularly sure that Florida Atlantic decides to move on the head coaching position after the 2016 season. And maybe they would have. I can tell you that the ball started to get rolling on making a coaching change after Florida Atlantic was blown out at home by 50 to Western Kentucky in that 2016 season. But I do think having that Gator head on the mantle the previous year would have probably had powers that be back off a little bit, or at least halt the momentum to potentially dismissing Charlie Partridge. But not having that SEC notch on the belt, I think helped expedite the process after that 2016 season started to go downhill. So what if FAU had beaten Florida? Not sure we get Lane Kiffin. Florida Atlantic Voice, presented by Robes Law Group, ROBES, RobesLawGroup.com. They are in the community for you. Robes Law Group, RobesLawGroup.com. Again, personal injury lawyers. All right, let's continue banging through some of your entries here into the great what if. Ross, what if Baker Mayfield had walked on to Florida Atlantic? And some of you might be asking yourselves, what the hell is Ross talking about? But Ross is on to something. And not just walked on, by the way, Ross. There was a whole-ass scholarship offer from Florida Atlantic to Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield, now franchise quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, was drafted to be franchise quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, man who came to prominence with the Browns along with former FAU kicker Craig Joseph in a same primetime Thursday night football game. That Baker Mayfield, who won the Heisman Trophy at Oklahoma, that Baker Mayfield, who's planting the Sooners flag in the middle of the O at Ohio Stadium, that Baker Mayfield, the same Baker Mayfield who is throwing double middle fingers across the field at the Kansas sideline during his collegiate career, that one, Baker Mayfield, he had a scholarship offer from Florida Atlantic. Not only did he have a scholarship offer, he damn near signed with Florida Atlantic. Baker Mayfield, in 2012, had scholarship offers from only 4 schools. There was 5 schools, I'm sorry. There was Rice, New Mexico, Army, Washington State, and Florida Atlantic. Baker Mayfield was on a podcast, the You Never Know podcast, several years ago. I don't even know if that exists any longer. Don't even know who hosted that. But they got Baker Mayfield. Pretty good pull. Here's the quote from Baker Mayfield. My first offer was to Rice to play baseball and football, and then I got to New Mexico. Army, I'm a big supporter of the service members, but I don't think I'm meant to go do that. And then Florida Atlantic and Washington State. I almost pulled the trigger on Washington State because of Mike Leach, and then I almost pulled the trigger on Florida Atlantic last minute because it was Boca Raton, and I might not be this pale anymore. Could be good for me if I went to Boca. You heard it from the man himself. Baker Mayfield, future Heisman winner. Baker Mayfield, future reclamation story, all-time feel-good reclamation story in the NFL. Now Tampa Bay Buccaneers legend, Baker Mayfield, nearly became an owl. His freshman year would have been 2013. Here's the problem for Baker Mayfield and why he probably made a wise decision to just walk on at Texas Tech. 2013, he would have been entering a pretty toxic situation, it turns out. Because we all know, like we previously discussed earlier in the podcast, what happened in 2013. That trip to the Keys. So what if Baker Mayfield had been at Florida Atlantic? Would have been awesome in retrospect. For him, probably would not, because of extenuating circumstances, been as sweet. Kyle, what if we completed the upset of number 1 North Carolina and advanced to the Super Regional in baseball many moons ago, with the baseball program as a whole being a dramatically different place? Now, again, some of you might have no idea what Kyle is talking about, especially you newcomer FAU fans. And it wasn't many moons ago. I mean, this is the same year we're talking about with Baker Mayfield potentially coming to Florida Atlantic. The Keys trip, the reset button of the FAU football program. 2013, the same year that Florida Atlantic baseball had one of the greatest years in program history, in the illustrious history of FAU baseball. 42 wins. Sun Belt regular season champions, Sun Belt tournament champions, including an emphatic blasting of Louisiana Lafayette on its home field to win the Sun Belt championship. Florida Atlantic goes on to the Chapel Hill Regional, where the host is number 1 in the nation, North Carolina. FAU falls to Towson. And quick backstory on this. I have not called any FAU baseball ever in my long FAU career except, how lucky am I, except this Chapel Hill Regional for Florida Atlantic. Back in the day, FAU, when they hired the sports information director, the person who compiles all the stats, the game stories, handles all the media responsibilities for coaches, compiles the box scores, all that. The SID for FAU baseball, one of the perks of the job was also being the radio voice. Now, it was online-only broadcast, but the radio voice, the broadcast voice of FAU baseball. And right before the regional started, that FAU SID/baseball broadcaster took another job and needed to start immediately. And so I was brought in out of the bullpen to travel with the team to Chapel Hill. This is the only time I've ever called FAU baseball, and I do think it's a shame that FAU baseball does not have a radio broadcast. In the American, more than half of the programs do have a broadcast, and they travel and they do the entire thing. And then more than half of the teams do have at least a home radio call. I wish FAU would go back to that. Not my decision, out of my pay grade. So it is what it is. But I called all of these games. FAU loses to Towson, game 1 on Friday afternoon. Not a good start, 7-2. So immediately Florida Atlantic is in the elimination bracket. FAU comes back early game Saturday, beats up on Canisius to keep itself alive. Then you go to Sunday. So this is day 3. Elimination game. FAU, Towson. Florida Atlantic jumps out to a lead, and they hang on for dear life, beat Towson 6-5. And so now Florida Atlantic is into an elimination game against number 1 in the nation, number 1 seed in the entire tournament, North Carolina. This is where things start to get weird, okay? Florida Atlantic is no hit in this game through 6 innings. In the 6th inning, Florida Atlantic loads the bases, 3 consecutive walks in the inning, still no hit, and FAU strands all 3. So Florida Atlantic is getting no hit going to the 7th after stranding the bases loaded in the previous inning. And what happens? North Carolina up 2-0 in the 7th inning. The walk parade continues. FAU runners first and second after 2 walks, and Ricky Santiago steps to the plate, and he hits a no-doubt home run to left center field. Florida Atlantic's first hit of the game in the 7th inning gives FAU the lead and eventually the win, 3-2 over North Carolina, and that sets up a do-or-die Game 7. A do-or-die Game 7 against the Tar Heels on Monday. Now, quick backstory with this, and I don't know. I don't think anybody other than John McCormick, the players who played in this game, Katrina McCormick, the legend at FAU, sports information director, I don't think anybody really knows that this FAU baseball team on Monday morning, before the biggest game of their lives, needed to pack up all their belongings in the team hotel and go to a different hotel. Because the hotel that they had booked, they booked it through Sunday in this regional, not accounting for the fact that there might be a Game 7 on Monday. Florida Atlantic had to go through a major rain delay on Sunday. And so they got back late. The game against North Carolina, that first game, started really late on Sunday. And FAU gets back to the hotel. They get about 6 hours of sleep, and then they have to wake up and pack up their stuff and go to a different hotel Monday early afternoon. Again, hours before they play in a do-or-die against the number 1 team in the country for the right to go to the Super Regional. Think about that. That's insane. So then what happens? FAU plays in maybe the greatest game in all of FAU history, no matter the sport. I'll put, as someone who saw it with his own eyes, let alone called it, I'll put it right up there. And I've told several of you that are listening to this that I do believe that this might be, before FAU's Final Four run, this is the greatest game that I have ever called in my entire career. So let's go to the top of the 9th. North Carolina is up 6-2 going to the top of the 9th. FAU has 3 outs to try and keep its season alive, okay? Florida Atlantic, leadoff homer from Keller, okay? So then it's 6-3. A fly out. Ricky Santiago then walked. So FAU down 6-3, top of the 9th, runner on first, 1 out. A Morales single, runners on first and second, 1 out. Nathan Pittman walked. Okay? That loads the bases. Okay? You have a strikeout, 2 outs. The bases are loaded. And then you have another walk, a bases loaded walk. Now it's North Carolina 6, FAU 4. FAU makes a pitching change, and then the most improbable home run, the most improbable sports moment I think I've ever called, I've ever seen, at least at the collegiate level. Rock line for Florida Atlantic, a no doubt. I mean rocket shot. I mean, you knew it as soon as it came off the bat. The entire sold-out, standing, raucous North Carolina baseball stadium, completely silent all at one time. Snap of a finger, blanketed in hushed tones. Rock line hits a 400-plus foot prodigious blast, grand slam, and just like that, the game is turned on its head, and FAU leads North Carolina 8-6 in Game 7 of a do-or-die regional with the right to go to the Super Regional on the line. And again, North Carolina is the number 1 seed in the entire tournament. But FAU's bullpen unable to hold up. Former Major Leaguer Zolk singles for North Carolina, 2-run single in the bottom of the ninth. That draws the score even 8-8. FAU would go 3 up, 3 down, top of the 10th. North Carolina 3 up, 3 down, bottom of the 10th. Nothing doing in the 11th. North Carolina, 11th inning. They can't push a run across. Then you get to the top of the 12th. And after Florida Atlantic has a runner on first, 2 outs after a hit by pitch, another walk, and then Meyer homers to left field. Down the line, a high blast. And FAU retakes the lead, a 3-run lead, top of the 12th to break the tie. It's 11-8, and that's where I started to think, wow, FAU's going to do this. Florida Atlantic's going to go to the Super Regional, but it was not to be. FAU's bullpen arms were just exhausted at that point, and the game gets tied bottom 12 at 11 apiece, and then North Carolina would get a game-winning single in the bottom of the 13th inning, and that was a wrap. And Florida Atlantic lost 12-11. But it is the most insane game, the most clutch Florida Atlantic performance, spectacle that I've seen since the Final Four team. I always think back to it when I'm thinking of the standard of FAU excellence. That baseball team, that baseball game in particular, staying alive after losing game 1, that entire regional. I mean, just epic stuff. That's just incredible. Now to the back end of Kyle's What If. Would the baseball program as a whole be in a dramatically different place? I don't think so. And I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but I think winning that game, FAU hosting a super regional potentially, and FAU, because there was a lower tournament seed that was in a super regional in that same part of the bracket, there was a real chance FAU, if they could beat North Carolina, was going to host the super regional. And the consensus was amongst the FAU brass that FAU Stadium, the NCAA was going to shy away from it because there was improper lighting for national television at the venue. They were going to have to bring in floodlights or something, or they had also reached out to Roger Dean Chevrolet Stadium up in Jupiter to potentially host a super regional. That's another interesting what if. But the baseball program, dramatically different place. I don't know. Maybe. But I still think that the transfer portal and NIL and this current era would have still put a huge gash in FAU baseball. And FAU baseball is still very competitive in a really tough conference in the American, but I don't know what would have changed after going to the Super Regional that would have elevated FAU to a point where it would have been impervious to this modern era of college athletics. I don't know. It feels good to think that, but I just don't know if it would have changed anything. But God, that 2013 Super Regional, that is on its face one of the most, if not the most underappreciated, unknown what-ifs in FAU sports history. Maddox, what if FAU won in overtime? FAU football won in overtime against Western Kentucky at the end of the 2022 football season. So Carter Davis misses a 46-yard field goal that would have won the game for Florida Atlantic at the end of regulation. In the season finale against Western Kentucky. This ends up being Willie Taggart's last game as FAU football head coach. Florida Atlantic in both non-COVID years under Willie Taggart, 5 wins, heartbreaking losses in the final week of the season, both years for Willie Taggart, both games at home, by the way. But yes, FAU has a chance to win it with Carter Davis, future Miami Hurricanes national championship game kicker Carter Davis, and he's wide left on a 46-yard field goal. FAU and Western Kentucky go to overtime in the final week of the season. Florida Atlantic strikes first, a touchdown in overtime. Extra point is good. Western Kentucky then scores, and then decides to go for two. So Florida Atlantic is one overtime, 2-point conversion stop away from going to a bowl game, and what happens? Western Kentucky hits it on a pass play, just inside the far right pylon. FAU loses second straight year at home, bowl eligibility on the line, and Willie Taggart, moments after the game, is dismissed as the head football coach at Florida Atlantic. This is a really good one for Maddox. What if FAU beats Western Kentucky in that game and does go to a bowl game? I think Willie Taggart probably stays as FAU's head coach. I'm speaking for me here. This is my inclination. I have never talked with Brian White about this at all. I suppose I could ask Brian White. In fact, I should. I will ask Brian White, and then I will also ask for his blessing to convey that to you. I don't want to just speak out of turn. He does sign my paychecks, right? My inclination would be that Willie Taggart stays on, that we never get to a Tom Herman era at Florida Atlantic. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean that I'm not sure there's the need to go out and hire a coach, period, because I do think that Willie Taggart gets the 2023 season as well. After that, extrapolating after that, I don't know. But just to answer at its base that question, if FAU, Carter Davis either hits the field goal, before that FAU gets a stop to get the ball back late in the game, Carter Davis makes the field goal, that sends FAU to bowl eligibility, or FAU gets the stop on the 2-point conversion to gain bowl eligibility. If FAU does that, yeah, I do think Willie Taggart is the head coach of Florida Atlantic in 2023. Ryan, and I've never really thought about this. What if FAU doesn't get its on-campus stadium? I don't know. Is Lockhart Stadium renovated past condemnation? FAU, it's last year at Lockhart Stadium, 2010. The far sideline stands could not be used because they had been condemned by the city of Fort Lauderdale. For those of you listening who don't remember, that is a real thing. The stands from the 10 to the 10 on the far sideline of Lockhart Stadium, 2010. Final year FAU used Lockhart Stadium in Fort Lauderdale, site of now Inter Miami's Chase Stadium, which hosted Inter Miami in its first team form up until this past December when they won the MLS championship. Now they play in Miami. But Lockhart Stadium, though that seating, we're talking thousands of seats, were condemned by the city of Fort Lauderdale. The place was dilapidated as FAU is finishing up its run at Lockhart Stadium. Yeah, is there a push, an agreement between FAU and Fort Lauderdale to renovate Lockhart Stadium? Does Lockhart Stadium still exist? Is Inter Miami, do they play elsewhere? There's a whole domino effect that comes off of this. Does FAU get into a long-term agreement like USF has had with Raymond James Stadium, where you pay an exorbitant amount of money to rent out the stadium? And is someone who has worked with media entities that have tried to do things from a broadcast standpoint in or around or with Hard Rock Stadium, let me tell you, it is devastatingly expensive. I mean, it's pathetic. It is a money grab. It's disgusting. And FAU, if they would have had to get into a long-term deal with Stephen Ross as owner of the Dolphins, and I think he's a good owner because I think he wants to win, but the way they have priced out everybody from even being adjacent with that stadium, it all happened under Stephen Ross, and it's gross. That would have cost FAU a lot of money that I don't think it had or does have or will ever really have for it to make financial sense. USF gets gouged badly by the Glazers there in Tampa Bay, or in Tampa. So, again, I don't know. I don't know what happens. My gut tells me that Lockhart Stadium is at least refurbished to an acceptable standard. But, again, you've then got FAU playing in Fort Lauderdale, a whole 20 minutes from campus. In this modern era of college football, how do you recruit to that? How do you make that someplace that students want to come to, players want to come to? I don't know. I don't know what happens if FAU doesn't get its on-campus stadium. Howard Schnellenberger, he's pulled off a lot of miracles. That might be the biggest one. And he never gave up on it. And I know that she is a footnote in Florida Atlantic history that maybe is not so positive, but Mary Jane Saunders, the president of FAU through her short tenure, she's the one that really helped push it through Tallahassee and get the financing for it. So don't want to ignore that. All right, final one here in the top what-ifs in FAU Athletics history. We already did Carter Davis, Western Kentucky. This is via Drew, by the way. What if Deion Sanders never got a college head coaching job? Why would Drew bring that up? Here's why. You want to know who Shedeur Sanders was first committed to as he was leaving high school and headed to play college football? Shedeur Sanders' first commitment, Deion Sanders' prized quarterbacking son, had given his pledge to Willie Taggart and Florida Atlantic. Willie Taggart, one of his first orders of business after he was let go at Florida State and took the FAU job shortly thereafter, was to get a commitment from Shedeur Sanders. But why did Shedeur not come to Florida Atlantic? It's because his father, Deion, shortly after that, took the head coaching job at Jackson State. That's how Shedeur Sanders ended up at Jackson State to play for his dad. If Deion does not get a college head coaching job, if Deion stays at the charter school that he opened that ran into some potential legal loopholes, it may have just been created for his kids to play sports. That's what's alleged. I'm not making that claim, of course. But if Deion never got into the head coaching realm at Jackson State, would Shedeur Sanders have come to play for Willie Taggart at Florida Atlantic? Maybe. And if Shedeur Sanders came to Florida Atlantic, guess who else probably comes? Family friend, Sanders' disciple, Travis Hunter. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that. If Deion doesn't go to Jackson State, I think there's a very real chance, maybe not greater than 50, but there's a very real what-if chance that Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter come to play in Boca. Now, that's a good what-if. That's a good one, Drew. Oh, one more from Drew. What if FAU hired Manny Diaz over Tom Herman? I don't think it would be much different. Than what actually transpired. If you can believe it, I think Tom Herman is a better football coach than Manny Diaz from a head coaching, overseeing staff, the entire thing. Manny Diaz at Miami, that thing, after so much bravado, is cratered. And when you're Miami and you're losing to FIU, how do you reconcile that? So no, Manny Diaz with major purse strings opened can have marginal success, like at Miami and like at Duke. Right? Manny Diaz, what made him successful at Duke this past year was tampering with and bringing in Darian Mensah from Tulane. And then Manny Diaz got upset that Mensah was tampered with by Miami, quote-unquote tampered, allegedly. I'll throw that out there. That keeps me out of trouble, allegedly. But Manny, come on, dude. Throwing stones, glass houses, the whole 10 yards. But no, I don't think Manny Diaz would have brought FAU to some sort of glory. I don't think that would have been appreciably better than the Tom Herman tenure. I don't. I'm not willing to go to that place. Oh, and there we go. That is quite the rousing edition of the Florida Atlantic Voice, the top what-ifs in FAU sports history. Man, we got through a lot there. So appreciate you either A, listening, or B, watching on YouTube. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Ken LaVicka, but also subscribe for me. Please subscribe to the Florida Atlantic Voice podcast. It's helpful to me, and rate it 5 stars if you could, whether it's Apple, whether it's Spotify, whether it's TuneIn, wherever you get your podcast. It is there for you. Please rate and subscribe to the Florida Atlantic Voice podcast. Even if you watch it on YouTube, it's just helpful to your boy if you subscribe to the podcast on those podcast entities. Anyone that you use or as many as you have access to, just please subscribe. Because, again, it's really, really helpful to me, and I appreciate that. Florida Atlantic Voice presented by Robes Law Group, ROBES, RobesLawGroup.com. Personal injury lawyers, slip and fall, motorcycle, automobile, any type of personal injury matter, there's only one place, Robes. Robes Law Group. Remember, Robes. Oh, what's that personal injury lawyer that Ken always talks about? It's the one that has the same name as the thing you throw on after you're done with the shower. Robes. Robes Law Group. ROBES. RobesLawGroup.com. We'll be back later this week, and well done, FAU fans, for all the what-ifs. That's some good inclusion, participation into the proceedings. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of it. This has been the Florida Atlantic Voice presented by Robes Law Group. Bye-bye.